Hello, my name is Roy Poyan, and I'm the Director of Families Impacted by Opioids. I want to thank you for joining us today for fentanyl and families in harm's way. What we're going to look at today is kind of a touchy topic. There's parts of it you may accept, there's parts of it that you might not accept. You don't have to accept it in its entirety, but to be aware of it is of value to our community as well as yourself. It's called harm reduction. And the concept is this, that if we can reduce the harm that is involved in taking drugs, and we can improve the quality of transitioning them into a detox and then into a recovery treatment center, then those steps that would be needed would probably include in some way, while they're getting ready to do this, that they stay alive long enough to do it. So harm reduction is surrounding the thought that we know that there are certain behaviors that they're doing that will cause them to overdose or become infected and create a medical situation that's irreversible. And in order to help them not be a victim to that, which is not, it's not what they're trying to do, but as a course of what they're doing, it may occur, we can remove that element of harm. That might include giving them clean needles. Other places have introduced the idea that giving them a decent place in order to use the drug under the supervision of a clinician, which you sit there and you think, well, that doesn't make sense. And then the other thought is, well, actually it does make sense, because number one, it's safer. Number two, we get to see what they're doing. Number three, while they're doing it, we get to sit there and say, are you sure you want to be doing this? At the moment that they're doing it. And they do that a couple of times, they might turn around, and often we find they do. They might say, I don't want to be doing this. I never wanted to be doing this. I don't know how to get out of it. Do you know the way? And then that dialogue has an opportunity to nurture itself. So when we look at harm reduction, it's a matter of how do we keep them alive long enough to help them, and what elements of harm can we manage and mitigate out of their path. So let's take a moment, if you're inclined to continue with this episode, and look more closely at harm reduction. It has a lot of uptick to it, and it is in motion. A lot of people are designing it in different ways. It's a creative concept, and for that reason, we will see it develop over time. Hello, thank you for joining us at the family table. Today's discussion about harm reduction can go in a lot of different directions. I think I'm going to take the one that's more conservative because it's easier for us to discuss. There are a lot of other political issues about harm reduction that I don't think we would benefit from reviewing. And what is most important about harm reduction is that we're taking the fact of the reality that this person is using, okay? We're not sitting there saying, well, we don't know much about how they use. Well, if that's the case at this point, you're choosing not to know much about how they use. Certainly is your choice. And so is harm reduction. It's a matter of choice. So if you are inclined to take steps that help this person to stay out of harm's way while they are using, without necessarily enabling them or encouraging them, but only to take it from the perspective of doing it safely is what matters. Not necessarily if you're going to do it, just leave it at that. Doing it safely is what matters. I don't like what you're doing. I don't approve of what you're doing. If you're doing it, do it safely. And for that reason, harm reduction can be a real advantage. So when we start to look at harm reduction, we're not just looking at the person and what they're experiencing in terms of clean needles if they're injecting, or other type of apparatuses that they use that aren't infected, areas of safety where they're using, it is often the case that people get raped, beaten, robbed, and in some cases murdered at these locations where drugs are being used. It's a very occult part of our society, as you can imagine. And for that reason, they are certainly, in a very severe way, in harm's way. So if you have a place that is providing harm reduction services, go ahead and contact them. Everything's anonymous, and ask them questions about what type of harm reduction programs are you offering, and how do I engage them, and what's involved in engaging them. You want to know, is there anything that's required before, during, and after? Is there anything that the family should be doing to be supportive of that, or to monitor it, or to make sure that there's some boundaries around it? What's their advice to you as a family? This could be a very enriching experience for you in terms of doing what's needed. The other advantage to harm reduction, when it's done in a way that is the first pass was created, is that while they're using in a place that's safe, they very often are using and they don't want to be using. They will say that to you. They will audibly say, I hate that this is doing this to me. I hate what it's doing to my family, my life, my friends. Everything's just a disaster as they're injecting. So in terms of injecting, it could be other types of ways that they're using. But in terms of a clean space, there is often a counselor that will ask them, is this something that you want to change? It's kind of like meet them in their moment of pain, and they might be listening more. Well, after they get high, they're not listening to anybody other than the pleasure, which is, by the way, extremely shortly lived. The more they use, they build up an endurance. So that high does not last nearly as long. And then when they come down, there's a new pain. But now they're trying to avoid the withdrawal, so their cravings kick in. So now they're on a completely different trajectory. And the moment of before they use is possibly one of the first places that they'll actually be listening to, we'll give this to you, but we want you to consider. If they hear that enough and they're in an environment where they could, one of these times they may come off of that use and say, you know what, I think I am ready to take the next step. What do we do? And in that case, they can then immediately engage them into their next choice, which of course would most likely include detox, if not emergency medicines involvement, a visit to the ER before they go to a detox. So with that in mind, the harm reduction process is multifaceted, and it is worth and worthy of you looking at. It may be that there's only a certain part that you're willing to accept. And be honest with the people that are talking to you. You might sit there and say, I want to know about harm reduction, but I absolutely do not want you to discuss with me the politics of it. I don't care. That's not my problem. It's not my interest. I just want to know about the mechanics of harm reduction, what they're going to be asked to do and can do and take advantage of, and how we as a family would participate in that. That's going to be very healthy for everybody involved. Now, let's talk about another topic, a little bit of an off topic. Harm reduction for the family members. Because this is now a traumatic experience. Your whole family has been traumatized by this. This wasn't something you saw coming, most likely, and it wasn't something that you asked for. But it's here, and it's a part of you, and it's not going away. So with that in mind, you might want to start to take a look at a kind of a risk exposure, a harm exposure, and do kind of an inventory with a behavioral health team that can take a look at each member of your family and say, kind of a check-in, kind of a tune-up, how are we doing individually? And then how are we doing as a family? Because it's very unlikely this impacted you without any kind of residual effect. You can almost be assured that if you're dealing with substance use disorders, somebody in your family has been disoriented by it, maybe even slipping into anxieties, depression, or self-harm themselves. And for that reason, harm reduction should not just be applied to the person that's experiencing substance use disorder. It should be applied to the entire family in another modality, in another way, only more universal to their needs, and considering that they have been harmed also. And because this is not going away, that harm will be repeating. In trauma, and I'm not suggesting that this is a form of trauma, but it may be, there is trauma, meaning the event, and then there is a complexity to the trauma where it is like repeating itself, maybe in more minor ways. I've heard it described as big T, little t. The big T happened, and then there are little traumas that happen because of that. Be aware, because you've taken these presentations, that in some way harm reduction does apply to everybody in the family, because the family is in harm's way. And with that in mind, you would benefit from taking a look at what type of response and what type of review and then what type of care you need to provide the family members with, as it is that you would like to reduce the impact of that harm. In the study guide, we start to explain that to you, and there are great videos on the topic of harm reduction. However, once again, just because of the way that this is rolling out, you're going to find a lot of the political agenda topics attached to that. So your best learning and your best conversations will likely come from the group that's in your community that's doing harm reduction, and just find out from them what it is that they're suggesting be done as it is relation to, and the goal is reducing your exposure to harm. So when we start to look at some of the rollouts of that, we're talking about nutrition, we're talking about mental health, we're talking about childcare, we're talking about, this is going to mess up any kind of education that's taking place with your other family members. We're talking about employment, we're talking about legal, we're talking about their ability to transition as they're moving through their journey with this. The family has got to transition also. So you're building interventions by the community, so you're involving people that are not yourselves and not of your family, and they would not necessarily have the benefit of understanding your family culture. That's going to have to be yours to more or less investigate and then be able to communicate. Listen, when you're talking to my family, we do best with outside agencies when this is done. And it may be that you're asking them to meet with one person to review what's going to be done so that they can more like interpret, okay, child support services is coming in. They're doing a review as to whether or not Donna can get back her children. Here's what we can expect with that visit. That type of harm reduction can be very helpful for your family members, only because you know what's going on, because number one, you took the child support services and foster care episode, but number two, you also use that as a launching point to understand better, so you went and reviewed and you met with the service agency and you have a better understanding of what's involved. Now you can act proactively in reducing harm, the revisited harm, the little t harm of the trauma that it will actually expose you to. The whole purpose of this is to reduce the harm that's likely to take place, not to ignore it or not to feel that what you're going to do is going to make it not happen or it's just going to go away. It's not, okay? This substance use disorder is extremely harmful to everything that it touches. It is like a contagious disease that destroys, and its sole purpose is death of whatever it is, death of love, death of education, death of a lot of things. But the fact of the matter is, it is designed to ruin whatever it touches. So let's take the steps now to reduce its harm. Hello, I want to thank you for continuing to view our episode. And we're now going to work into the area of the 3Ds. This is an important characteristic for the family to develop skills in. And we'll start by taking the time to look at an issue and then determine the issues based on the area of determining a solution, developing a decision, and designing a plan of action. By using your Module 3 workbook and going to a specific issue, you'll be able to find that the first step in that 3D skill set is the FTR, the Family Transformational Model. And the Family Transformational Model is a set-up way, each time the same way, that we will take 5 categories to look at in determining a solution. And each category is going to have 3 questions. So let's get started. The first is to define the issue. Naturally, we'll want to know what the issue is. The word issue is really problem, but we're saying the word issue is, the reason we're saying the word issue is it's just a little bit easier to digest, because it's not always a problem. Sometimes it's just something that's happening, and we need to determine a solution to it. The next question is, how does the issue impact the family? We need to know that. We need to know, we have an issue, that's fine. The issues can exist, but if it's impacting the family, in what way is it impacting the family? And then what steps can the family take to prepare and then respond to the issue? That's very important for us to know. The fact is that this issue exists and it's impacting the family. We tend to believe maybe there was something we could have done to kind of get ready for it. And if there was, then we would want to have taken those steps, which is what all these episodes are about. And then who can help assist us and the family in our response? So we want to start to ask ourselves, we know that there's an issue, we know that it's impacting the family, and there are things that we could do to prepare for this, but we're probably going to need a resource, information, another person outside of our family, or maybe one of our family members specifically can use their functionality and contribute. So we want to identify that. And then what should the family expect as their outcome? And kind of a start with the end in mind thought, where we're saying, if we're going to do something, it's going to result in something. So is that result desirable? Is that really what we want? Because if we're going to create a solution, then we want the solution's outcome to be what we expect it would be. So in each of these categories that I just described, 1 through 5, there are 3 questions, and we're going to ask ourselves each of these. Let's go back into the first category, define the issue. Clearly state what happened or what will happen. We want to know very clearly what happened or what's likely to happen. And then write that down. Identify who's involved or who should be involved. And then what would you like to have happen or like to see happen? The third question in every category is going to be used. You'll see how in just a minute. But just remember, the third question in every category, so this question right here, the way you answer it, will be reused. Now the next question is, how is the issue impacting the family? Who in the family exactly is impacted? In what way are they impacted? And then the third question is, what is needed to move forward? And then the third category is, what steps can the family take to prepare and then respond to the issue? The 3 questions again. What needs to be done? And then prioritize that list. Who needs to be involved? And then what will it look like, the third question, what will it look like when completed? Then the 4th category is, who can help and assist the family in their response? The 3 questions are, how to search and organize this organization to help you. In other words, it's not enough that you know you're going to go and introduce yourselves to a treatment center in your community. You want to start to determine, how do I look for them and organize my way of seeking help, because it might not just be that group alone. You may also need other services to kind of start to create a who can assist us. And it may be many different types of people. What to ask from them, and then what to expect. Remember the third question, what to expect. And then the fifth category is, what should the family expect as their outcome? Well, that has to do a lot with timing. And if it takes a certain amount of time, let's be realistic of what that is. That has something to do with the expense of the involvement, of getting involved in this issue. And then the third question being required changes, our changes as family members, for this response to successfully take place. Now, let's state what our solution is. Hey, this is the great news. You've already developed your solution. By answering each of these three questions, the third question in every category, you'll pull forward now into your statement. So your first sentence of your statement is the third answer in the first category. What would you like to have happen or like to see happen? Well, that becomes your first sentence. So what your first sentence for your solution statement is, what we would like to see happen is, and you just pull your answer from there to here. Do the same thing with the second category. How does the issue impact the family? Using the third question's answer, what is needed for the family to move forward? So now your second sentence is, what's needed to move forward is, and now you're accumulating these answers from these categories, the third question, and it's actually becoming your first sentence, your second sentence, your third sentence, your fourth sentence, and your fifth sentence in your solution statement. So your solution statement is going to sound something like, what we would like to see happen is, and what's needed to move forward will be, and then the third question from the third category, what it will look like when completed will be, and then what we expect will be, and then what's required for us to have a successful response is. Now those are your 5 sentences. You've just constructed your solution. And this is how you go about using a model for creating a solution. For any issue in life you'll have to face, you can use this as a way of approaching it. Now let's go to the other area, which is the second coping skill, making a decision. Let's make a value-based decision. Let's make a decision each time that kind of balances with what we value most. So first we want to determine, what are our values? Well, the best way to do that is to write down on a piece of paper, what types of things do you as an individual value most? And each member of your family can do this in a kind of a group exercise. And then once you've done that, I value love, I value honesty, I value relationships and sharing. These could all be an individual's 1, 2, 3. Then prioritize them. Which of the 1, 2, 3 is most important? Then have each member of the family do the same thing. And then you can sit there and say to the family, what was your number 1? What was your number 2? What was your number 1? What was your number 1? What was your number 1? And then what was your 2? What was your 2? What was your 3? What was your 3? And where you start to see many people in the family say, well, my number 1 is relationships, my number 2 was trust, and my number 3 was love. Well, then you talk to another person, they say, well, my number 1 was love, my number 2 was personal expression or confidentiality, or so they mentioned something different, but they did mention love. And then the third member of the family happens to mention love also. You know now that love is a value of the family. So whatever decisions you make, you want to balance it on the fact of, does this disrupt our values? If it does, at least you know that it does, and to what degree. You're calculating that. But at least also you're including, what do we value most? Let's make sure our decisions don't counter that. And now, in the first step, we're going to identify exactly what's happened. And this is, by the way, in your book, okay? And it is for each of the episodes. Now, identify exactly what's happened what happened, how did it happen, who did it happen to. Then the second step is analyze the situation, assess the problem, identify the problem, and in what areas did the problem create an impact. You're writing all of these down. The third step of that the third step in the decision-making model is what is the number of one contributing factor? What is causing this issue to take place? You need to know that before you make a decision. The fourth step is, now that you know the number one factor, you need to go out and find out what information there is about this. Your primary source, you're going to go to the actual person or organization that's involved with this and ask them, what is this issue, and help us to understand it better. The secondary source would be somebody's telling you this happened, or somebody suggests that you should do something a certain way, and it's coming from somebody else other than the primary source. It could be an article, a clinical paper. These are all secondary sources, and you gather them and you make them part of your primary, secondary information gathering. The third area that you look at is your gut. What does your gut, because that's often where our faith comes in, and other things that are very important when making decisions get included. So trust your gut is what we're saying in the decision-making process. The fifth step in making a good quality decision is where you're taking a criteria and saying, let's take what we're going to make a decision about and let's balance it on the criteria to make sure that we're covering all of our bases. And this will ensure safety of your loved one. Is safety a part of what's being considered? And do we have the resources that are needed to do the decision we're looking at? And then do we understand the timetable? Is it realistic? And do we understand the negative impacts? Because every decision has a positive and negative. Well, identify what the negative outcomes might be so that you can weight the factor of, is this a good decision? And then would you do this would you ask others to do this if they were doing it for you? Meaning it was done for you or to you. Is this still a good decision? These are all areas that you want to take a look at. The third coping skill is in the area of the family plan of action. And everybody could say, well, Roy, listen, we're just going to go out and do it. Well, it's going to get done a lot more effectively. I want to warn you that the addiction industry is not organized. And then again, either is the family. So you're taking two disorganized organizations and you're putting them together. So a plan is a very good idea. The other factor is you're going to more than likely require the assistance of a lot of different groups. And as time goes by, those groups are going to change. And now it's a whole new set of groups that you're dealing with. When you're at the hospital, the ER, that's what that is. Then you move over to detox, that's what that is. Then you move over to therapy and treatment, and that lasts for 16 weeks. That's what that is. Then you're looking at sober living, recovery, maybe incarceration, and then reentry. On all that's involved in that. So there's all sorts of reasons why a plan put on paper based on the decision and the information gathering that you've made, based on the solution that you want to use, are very good ideas. It all comes together with the plan of action. Then you take the plan of action and you go find a professional to help you. Everything that we've done up to now is to position you to a place where you can be properly assisted and directed and supported. This is what's often missing in the families. This is what exhausts the families. This is where the families get into fights internally on. So, for that reason, we're going to apply the 3D coping skills. Determine a solution. We're going to develop a decision, and we're going to design a plan of action. And we're going to do it each time. I hope this is helpful for you. I'm confident it will be.